Welcome back. In this video, we're diving into a topic that's at the core of our spiritual journey, the ego. What is it? How does it take shape? And why is dissolving it so important to our growth? Let's break it down. The ego is essentially the sense of self that we build over time. It's the part of us that says, I am this, or I want that. It's the identity we create to navigate the world. Our personality, our preferences, our fears, our desires. At its core, the ego is about separation. It's the belief that we are individuals, separate from everything else in the universe. The ego starts forming in early childhood. As we begin to understand the world around us, we start to differentiate ourselves from others. We learn to say, I. And from that moment on, we start building our ego. It's shaped by our experiences, our upbringing, our environment, and our traumas. Over time, this sense of self becomes more complex, more rigid, and more attached to external validation, what we think we need to be happy, successful, or fulfilled. The ego takes shape through a combination of free will and the veil of forgetting. The veil of forgetting is the spiritual mechanism that causes us to forget our true nature, our connection to the divine, to others, and to the universe. It's a necessary part of being human because it allows us to experience separation and free will. Without it, we'd always be fully aware of our divine connection, and life on earth wouldn't have the same opportunities for growth and discovery. So as we go through life, the ego is shaped by the choices we make using our free will. Every time we choose to align with fear, judgment, or separation, we feed the ego. And because of the veil, we often forget that we are part of something much bigger. The ego becomes a survival mechanism, a way for us to navigate the world and protect ourselves from perceived threats. But the problem is, the ego isn't our true self. It's a construct. It's based on fear, separation, and the belief that we need to protect and defend ourselves at all costs. The more we let the ego run the show, the more disconnected we become from our higher self and our true purpose. When the ego is unchecked, it can lead to a life dominated by fear, anger, and control. We become overly attached to our opinions, our desires, and our sense of identity. This often shows up as judgment of others and ourselves, blaming external circumstances for our problems, constantly chasing external validation, like success recognition, material things, because the ego tells us that's where happiness lies. Unchecked ego can lead to a life of constant striving and suffering. When we're ruled by the ego, we're always seeking something outside of ourselves to complete us, but we never feel truly fulfilled. We become defensive, reactive, and closed off to growth because the ego is afraid of losing control. Now, let's talk about how the ego is linked to the inner child and trauma. When we experience trauma, especially as children, the ego steps in as a protector. It creates patterns and behaviors to shield us from pain, rejection, or abandonment. These patterns often take the form of defense mechanisms. We might become people pleasers, perfectionists, or hyper-independent, all in an attempt to avoid the emotional wounds we carry. The ego creates a story about who we need to be to survive and be loved. But this story is rooted in fear and illusion. Over time, the ego gets wrapped up in these stories and we become identified with them. We forget that we are more than our traumas, more than our wounds, more than the roles we've taken on to protect ourselves. In order to truly heal, we need to address the wounds of the inner child and bring love and compassion to those parts of ourselves that are still carrying the pain. By doing this, we can begin to dissolve the ego and reconnect with our true self, the part of us that is whole, worthy, and complete, no matter what. Dissolving the ego doesn't mean erasing your sense of self. It's about transcending the limited, fear-based identity that the ego has created. It's about recognizing that you are not separate from the universe, that you are connected to everything, and that your true power comes from your divine nature, not from external validation or control. When we dissolve the ego, we step into a state of unity consciousness. We no longer see ourselves as separate from the others. We no longer need to protect or defend our identity because we understand that our true self cannot be harmed. We become more open, more loving, more willing to serve others and to live in alignment with our soul's purpose. So what does it mean to live with the ego dissolved? It means living from a place of wholeness, not lack. It means recognizing that you are a part of something much greater, and that your identity doesn't come from your accomplishments or your opinions. It comes from your connection to the divine. The ego is a necessary part of the journey, but it's not the destination. By healing our wounds, embracing our inner child, and using our free will to allow and love, we can transcend the ego and live in harmony with our true selves. Thank you for joining me, and remember, dissolving the ego is a process of self-discovery and healing, and it's one of the most powerful steps you can take on your spiritual journey. My name is Tyler Redbeard, and I will see you in the next video.